We've heard some surprising behind-the-scenes leaks from BioWare, with leadership allegedly being out of touch. Ubisoft have released their financials and hinted about the state of the Epic Games Store in the process, and both Sony and Microsoft are teaming up with each other to improve streaming technology. So today, we have a very fun roundup to get into. Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Roundup, the twice per week gaming news show where we run through all of the most important stuff that's happened in the industry. This was a super fun one to write. There's a lot of stuff going on, so strap in, let's get into it. Let's start off with MMOG Fails, a mysterious blog that has been posting about the failures of massively multiplayer games for about 6 years now, and have apparently heard juicy details on Anthem from one of their sources at EA. Again, grain of salt. Anthem is apparently coming to EA Access around the time the service launches on the PlayStation 4, which I think we would all agree does make sense. EA have recently talked about the subscription model being one of their focuses because it drives fantastic revenue for them, and they save value for their customers, driving them towards playing a wider variety of games. If each of their games has monetization, then getting players, just through the door initially is an important step, and let's be honest, who's going to go out of their way to buy Anthem now at a box price? Not that many people. So they may as well use it to sweeten the EA Access deal for anyone who's curious enough about that game and has the service. Now, the next bit of information is a bit spicy from this source. Apparently, the leadership at BioWare are blaming the poor performance of Anthem on, obviously, the players. If that's true, then, hey, they would be actually less in touch than I would have previously imagined. They supposedly blame this primarily on negativity around the Anthem situation, vitriol being, quotes from the actual article, and they actually go a step further too, blaming EA, apparently, for saying that things can just be patched because it's a games-as-a-service model. Apparently, therefore, neither BioWare nor EA expected the backlash that they received for this approach. And I think it's a pretty clear example of corporate delusion on their end, if true. They knew they overpromised and underdelivered, yet were still okay asking for a full price and expecting their, good little customers to thank them for their efforts. It's an absolutely terrible form of, it's just terrible form from management and the developer and the publisher, and the more we hear about BioWare's behavior, it just paints a sad picture for the studio, one that of course was highly respected at one point. Given their reliance on BioWare magic, which we've all talked about to death, I think there might have just been a sense of egotism and of hubris at the studio, at least in the top brass, and we all know what happens in cases like that. Now, saying that, Anthem still sold 3.7 million units according to this leak. Again, massive pinch of salt, which would be a resounding success for most games, just not one that's been in turbulent and expensive development for, 7 years? It, of course, would be a massive failure as compared to EA's internal forecasting, with the company predicting 6 million sales in the first 6 weeks. And, this is a lot less than that in a lot more time. If the leak is true, then yeah, this is a terrible performance. It's a large sunk cost for EA, but they supposedly are still committed to the game because it fills a sort of a hole in their offerings, and they've said as much in their earnings call about being committed to Anthem into the future. Now, this means, according to this blog post and the leak, that it could go free to play if patches and EA Access don't give it the boost that they want, which, we'll see. Now, on that front, BioWare supposedly are working like mad to make the game better, including a loot redesign that's in the works, but is quite a way off. And then there's one last thing from this post, that is that their community manager, Jesse Anderson, has had his hands tied for management and pretty much just can't say anything. Now remember that this is unconfirmed. It is coming from a blog who is not naming its source. They seem to be fairly well connected from some past stuff, but take this with a dump truck full of salt. If true, it's crazy, but right now we can just talk about it as an interesting hypothetical, but it's just a leak. Okay, still in the realm of large publishers though, and mostly on a positive note, we've got Ubisoft. They released their financial report this week, and as a result of that, their shares fell 13% despite record profits. When have we heard that before? Now, before we get into, how they made a profit but still had their shares fall, I think, are first going to skip to something that concerns our dear friends over at Epic Games. Ubisoft claimed that The Division 2 sold 10 times as much on Uplay as The Division 1 did. And while we can talk about how this, just about how the second game is a big improvement over the first one, or how PC gaming itself has grown quite a lot in the years since The Division 1, there's a large elephant in the room here. The Division 2 is available on two storefronts, Uplay and the Epic Games Store. So clearly without Steam as an option, it looks like the vast majority of sales made use of purchasing just the game directly from the source on Uplay. And while we don't know how many sales were on the Epic Games Store, it was rather conspicuously not mentioned in the earnings report. Now, on the topic of The Division 2, it apparently underperformed on console because of competition in the market, but they say no such thing about PC. And honestly, there can be more information gleaned from a lot of these reports based on what's not said, which is a bit odd. Now, on the topic of PC though, the PC platform provided 27% of their bookings this year, which is up massively from last year's 18%. That's a 50% increase. So really it looks like PC gaming is just on the up, and personally I'm quite heartened to see that the loot shooter genre is being experienced, on its finest form with a mouse and a keyboard. Anyway, no, on the final topic here, that number also officially leaves PC as a bigger market for Ubisoft than Xbox One, which only made 20% of their net bookings. That's not entirely surprising, but it's a nice thing to see all the same. Now back to that steep dip in their share price. Most of this seems to be attributed to another massive game being delayed, Skull and Bones. This pirate game was first shown off at E3 2017 alongside Sea of Thieves, to the amusement of many because they were pretty similar games, just with different art styles. And I mean, it's funny, we probably should do a deep dive in the logistics behind companies just jumping on the same trend at once. But Skull and Bones was originally slated for a late 2018 release, but, this time last year, they announced a delay to 2019, and it has now been confirmed that the game is going to release in the next fiscal year. And that means April 2020 or later. Obviously, many of us do view delays as being preferable in today's AAA world. We've had so many games like Anthem, which frankly needed more delays to actually be in a good state. So hopefully this is a good sign, and it's Ubisoft knowing that they have to release a good game at the start. Ubisoft does seem to have their heads screwed on in a variety of ways, and this seems to be one of them. It's going to hurt their finances for the next while. Yes, they took that stock dip, but they've garnered a positive reputation from gamers by generally not screwing up that hard recently, and not being Anthem certainly is a good thing. Now, saying that, they've had their fair share of successes. They say they were very happy about Far Cry 5's performance, which outsold every Ubisoft game released this generation, although they didn't say anything about its spin-off New Dawn. Now, it was a spin-off, but it seems like Far Cry 5 was enough Far Cry for a while, with New Dawn only selling 13% of what Far Cry did at launch. Now, that's physical UK game sales, but they did release pretty close to each other, so I think it's a relevant enough statistic. Ubisoft, of course, have ran into issues when it comes to churning out games before. Series burnout is a very real thing, and they know that all too well, with Assassin's Creed suffering from that in the past. Next, though, let's go over the most interesting statistic from this report. 32% of their net bookings are from what they called recurrent player investment, which basically is any in-game spending after the initial game purchase. So that includes season passes, subscriptions, and other DLC. That's a very impressive amount of money, with it seemingly being primarily from season passes, content updates, and their in-game microtransactions, which for the most part Ubisoft have done pretty well. At least they've been good at supporting their games, and it's further reinforced by this. 57% of that 32% came from back catalog titles. That is, games that did not release in the fiscal year that they were talking about. So the factors here are primarily Rainbow Six Siege, which has generated $1.12 billion since it first launched, and For Honor, which is another one of Ubisoft's pretty successful course corrections, though not as successful as Siege. Of course, it's a game that suffered a lot at launch, but has since made great strides. There are then 3 unannounced titles for this fiscal year from Ubisoft. Now, of course, I would bet on that being Far Cry, Watch Dogs 3, and maybe a smaller game. It seems like there's a Splinter Cell game on the cards, but I don't think it's going to be this fiscal year. I'd say the third game is more likely going to be something experimental or interesting like Steep, which actually just became free on Uplay for a week. Is that a coincidence? A cheeky hint? I suppose time will tell. Then moving on to other news, we have something that's, well, a bit nebulous with its potential. Microsoft and Sony have signed a memorandum of understanding regarding their collaboration in 3 areas: cloud solutions in Microsoft Azure, semiconductors, and artificial intelligence. Now, not all of this applies to us in the gaming sphere, but the cloud solutions part absolutely does. And this is what the press release says. The 2 companies will explore joint development of future cloud solutions in Microsoft Azure to support their respective game and content streaming services. Now, before we get too much further into this, what is a memorandum of understanding? Well, basically, it's a document that parties can sign. It's not legally binding, but it is an official statement of what shared goals the parties want to achieve and their intent to work together on them. In this case, Microsoft and Sony will both benefit from improved technologies in these spaces, and they're putting that into writing. They're saying they're going to work together to deliver better experiences across the board, which, I mean, it could be a beneficial thing to us in a few different ways. Microsoft's Azure setup seems quite fantastic by all measures, and Sony working with that technology to make it better and to leverage it in their own operations, well, that could result in better streaming for games and other media and better online support for games, which for the people who, play those games and use those services would be a good thing. The focus here definitely seems to be on game streaming though, and there's one part of this that sticks out to me the most. They're working together on streaming solutions. Now, everyone in the industry is committed to some sort of streaming solution as a part of what they think the future of games may actually be, and what technology might be successful, and all the bets that everybody is making. There's certain technologies like, say, VR and motion controls, and even early online endeavors that have all had rough starts because different parties approach them in different ways and at different times. But with streaming, it seems to be a big all-hands-on-deck approach from a lot of different companies. And while it all sounds good on paper, it does leave us with a number of giant issues. First, do we actually want these game streaming services? I think right now the common discourse points towards that being a no from core gamers. People want to own their games, and they want to play them with minimal latency and minimal input lag. Streaming is set to counter this in the future with better technology, better networks, and I mean, there have been reports that Stadia on a good connection can actually have less button-to-screen latency than an Xbox One. That's according to Digital Foundry, and I really do trust Digital Foundry, but it's impossible to know, broadly speaking, until it's in our hands. This is a much deeper topic though, something for another day overall, but I think we just have all of our own hopes and fears on streaming as a technology and how it could change the way the industry works. Now, there is one more fear that kind of comes to my mind as a result of this. Microsoft and Sony are giant corporations, and we all know their ultimate goals are to sell services to customers. So with any mutual goal, it can be boiled down to this. They can both sell their services to customers without stepping on each other's toes. If that wasn't the case, they wouldn't work together. They wouldn't, cooperate if they were competing directly. And it leads me to believe that both companies are confident that they are not directly competing on each other's streaming market, but rather they, want to offer a high-quality service, and they think that customers will be happy to pay for both. But the thing is, we all know what that means as consumers. It means fragmented game streaming services, much like with television and movie services today, where, you need Now TV, Amazon Prime, and Netflix. And that's a future that I think a lot of people don't want because of what we've seen with TV streaming. Now, as a positive, yeah, those companies working together to provide a really good quality service, that's great. But overall, I still am quite worried about it. Now, to round up today's roundup, let's go over some smaller bits of news. So first of all, we've got something I'm super keen to play with. Steam Link is available now for iOS and Apple TV a year after it was pulled. Now, I love my iPad Pro. I do a lot of work in that, a lot of note-taking and stuff. And despite the sort of bad rap that the tablet and phone gaming scene has had, well, if I could play a Steam game on a fast local network on my iPad with a controller, that could be great. I could orient my iPad in a much more comfortable way than I ever could my TV, so I could, sit comfy in the sofa and play a full PC game, or maybe I could get, those clip-on sort of side controllers for my iPad, which would give me a Nintendo Switch-like experience for a game like Stardew Valley, and I could play that on my couch streaming from my PC. which honestly sounds like a pretty good experience, and that's probably something I'll try to test out in the future. And I suppose while we're talking about handheld stuff, the Switch has now reportedly outsold the PS4 in Japan, which really is quite impressive given how much less time the Switch has been out for. Now, the Japanese, yeah, they've been moving into PC and console gaming a little bit more, but historically they've been very big in their handhelds and are actually quite big in mobile as well. The Switch is supremely compact, and its lineup focuses on games that Japan's gamers will want to play, and it's kind of displaced a part of Sony's previous reputation with that, so none of this is really surprising, but it tells us this: the West is more than ever focusing on its home consoles and PC primarily. China and the West then are the primary markets for PC games, with China poised to take that crown soon, and mobile just being dominant in Asia overall. We'll see more of this impact how games are created and marketed for each platform going forward, and that's probably something that I'll do as a deep dive at some point in the future. And with that, that's where we're going to call things today. A real spice-laden video, really. So let me know, what do you think about the attributes of these publishers? Does a reputation affect how you buy games, or is it just all about the quality of a game in isolation for you? And then on the streaming front, are you suspicious of companies working together? Do you think we'll end up in a weird Netflix, Amazon Prime sort of fragmented market full of exclusives kind of situation, or do you think it'll turn out well? I'm super interested to hear what you think about these topics, so please let me know. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I'll see you next time.